Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the seminar series on research methods. We're just going to pause a little bit as people are trickling in, and I will start to share my screen so that people know that they are in the right place. So it's 1 minute past, so we'll go ahead and get started so that by the time that I've finished the introduction, people have had time to grab their lunches and settle down. So once again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second seminar in the EDI Caucus's Research Methods series. My name is Fenella Watson, and I'm the Senior Project Support Officer on the caucus. And I'll introduce Lukas and Sean, our speakers, after this introduction. You might see other Fenella Watsons asking questions or in the attendees, and that's because I send the EDICa team a link to join using my own registration to make it easier for them. So please know that if it's Fenella Watson asking a question in the question and answer, it's not me. I can't actually ask a question in the Q&A as a host. It's one of my colleagues. EDICa has a code of conduct. We provide a harassment-free experience for everyone, regardless of any of their identification. We don't tolerate harassment of any kind in our events, and you will be removed if we do find that people are being inappropriate, either in the chat, which is enabled, or in other ways. In terms of accessibility, we offer British Sign Language on request, and that's because there's a shortage of interpreters. And so when we discuss that with the interpreters, then they've advised to do it on request. There's been no request for one this time. However, we do make our recordings. We have the interpreters do a BSL interpretation, and then that goes onto our website and our YouTube channel, and I post that into our social media channels when we've got those done. So the interpreting team are able to do it outside of their other duties at Heriot-Watt University. For closed captions, you can click on the ... 3 dots at the bottom of the Zoom screen to enable that function. So some housekeeping and introductions. You can use the Q&A function to type a question. You can upvote questions that you want to see answered. If time is limited, then we will prioritize those with the most votes. Chat has been enabled for community discussion. This is a very current topic, and we're hoping that there will be some interesting discussion going on. Abusers of this privilege will be removed. We have about 20 minutes of presentation plus a demo of the Scribe tool that they're going to show us, and followed by a Q&A and discussion. And we do try and finish promptly at 2 o'clock. So just a short introduction for those who are new to the EDI Caucus. So that's EDI meaning quality, diversity, and inclusion. And it is a project, an initiative that was funded by UKRI with additional support from the British Academy. It started in early 2023 and is due to finish in 2025. However, we're looking for an extension, and of course, we're looking for further funding to continue our research. Some of the key actions of EDICa are to research the evidence base for inclusive careers across the UK's research and innovation systems, to remove barriers experienced by marginalized groups and support them to access and thrive in chosen careers, to conduct interdisciplinary research, to create national and international communities of practice, and to use a co-design approach with stakeholders and people with lived experience. So this is a research methods seminar series that we've started. This is the second one, and the next slide will show you some upcoming seminars. In an increasingly diverse and interconnected world, the need for rigorous research methodologies to examine equality or equity, diversity, and inclusion has never been greater. The EDI Research Methods Seminar Series is dedicated to equipping researchers and practitioners with the tools, frameworks, and approaches necessary to critically analyze and address EDI issues across various domains. So here you can see some upcoming seminars. So we've got about one a month. So we've got 11th of June, social network analysis, 2nd of July, machine learning and gender, 4th of September, so we take a break for August just for the holidays. 4th of September, we have literature review and Black women academics experience. 2nd of October, we've got co-production in the context of neurodiversity. And then we take a break for November, which is when EDICa is having our project symposium or conference, which will be hybrid, so you can join us online for that. And whether we have one in December we're still working on that one. We do record these and we do share them on our YouTube channel and on our website for people to reference. And we also, where we are allowed, put the slides there for people to reference for accessibility. Our website is supposed to be a resource tool. It's a library of resources on equity in research and innovation careers. We continue to work on that and to add to it. This is not just for EDICa's own research, but also sharing other good practice and research conducted by other researchers. And now to today's main event, using AI, that's artificial intelligence, to transform EDI research. We have two speakers from the Autonomy Institute, which is an independent progressive research organization based in London. They've worked on the concepts such as the 4-day working week and the universal basic income. Autonomy are co-investigators of the EDI Caucus, and they particularly work in Workstream 3, which is looking at enabling workspaces. So without further ado, I will pass over to Lukas, Kikuchi, and Greaves from the Autonomy Institute, who will introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanilla. I'll just, before I share my screen, I guess I'll introduce myself. So, yes, I'm Lukas Kikuchi. I am the head of the data unit, Autonomy Data Unit, at the Autonomy Institute. So Autonomy Institute as a whole is as Vanilla said, we're a sort of a progressive research institute. We produce policy. We also support our sort of the general progressive sector, other organizations. In particular, my team, the data team, we do sort of data support work, sort of bespoke technical work for other progressive organizations. We also produce tools for both our in-house policy team and consultancies, and also for external organizations. So this is basically what we're going to be talking about, or one instance of this is what we're going to talk about in our presentation. Sean, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Lukas. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you today. So I'm Sean Greaves. I'm a researcher at Autonomy. So I work in the data team with Lukas. More specifically, I lead much of the prototyping for a number of autonomy software tools, and specifically the ones that are using kind of LLMs and some of the latest AI technologies. Prior to Autonomy, I was working in machine learning solutions engineering in the tech sector at companies including IBM. So yeah, very much looking forward to today's discussion. So maybe with that, I'll pass back to Lukas.
Okay, so is everyone struggling to hear me? Is my volume okay?
You're a bit soft. So if you hug the computer.
Maybe I will, sorry for the delay, I'm just going to, okay, I increased my microphone. For some reason it was quite low.
That's a lot better, thank you.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll now share my screen. Can you see this? Alrighty. Okay. So, yes, today we're going to be talking about Scribe, which is an in-house tool that we've developed. It's not a tool that you can sort of find online right now. Sort of, it doesn't have a website as such, although we will present a sort of a sketch of a demo at the end, which will sort of show what some of the capabilities of Scribe, but it's essentially a methodology or a tool that we've applied a few times inside Autonomy, and it's a AI tool to deal with large sets of free-form text survey responses. But before I go into Scribe, I'm just going to briefly go over a bit about our organization. So Autonomy's DNA. Yes, we're a not-for-profit where we do independent research. We do both our own research and we work with other progressive organizations and some political parties. We are funded by a mix of core funding, foundations, so to speak, and also doing sort of progressive consultancy work and other kind of client work. We're progressive. Our main focus is broadly freedom, equality, and sustainability. We do work on the shorter working week. We do work on the universal basic income. We also have done work in climate change. Recently, we've also engaged with some of the discourse on the emergent far right. Finally, we like to say that we walk the walk. We have forward-thinking workplace policies. We obviously produce policy on the shorter working week, but we also have a shorter working week, 4-day week. Yeah. Our work can be very, very broadly split up into three. So we do research. A lot of the research we do has a data-led quantitative component. So that's sort of the purview of my team. So if we do a policy report on universal basic income, the sort of economic analysis, the micro simulations will be done by my team to support the policy recommendations we make. We also do strategy work. We consult for different branches of government. We've done work on labor skill shortages in green transition. We also work with investigative journalists and trade unions to sort of both enhance their practice and also shape their strategic aims. We also produce intelligence. This is in a way kind of a linked to the strategy. We produce intelligence by doing a lot of web scraping. I mean, to some extent, the tool we're about to present here is a manifestation of that as well. We want to be able to source opinions, source qualitative information from wide ranges of sources, and we've often deploy AI and other sort of tech stacks to basically get a lot of intel on various political issues. And as I mentioned, we use AI a lot in our practice. We've used it even before, maybe, I mean, what was it, 2 years ago, where ChatGPT came out. But the game has somehow been, I mean, it's somehow changed quite a lot since then because of ChatGPT. It's been semi-revolutionized. So that has also meant that the principles by which we do approach AI had to adapt as well, primarily because of the power of AI, but also the potential pitfalls of AI. So, and when I say AI in this sense, I do refer to sort of the recent boom of large language models, generative AI. I mean, the thing you're talking to on ChatGPT, basically. So we've developed an approach to AI that sort of tries to exploit all its capabilities, whilst also remaining cautious of the AI hype bubble. So the three principles that we've developed is, firstly, the idea of lossless processing. So if you give a long text to ChatGPT and ask it to summarize it, you'll get a summary, and often it's quite good. But if you want to present that to other people, if you want to present that to clients, you want to do it in such a way that you have ease of access to the original source material. So, and that's what we mean by lossless. We can transform some of the data using AI, but we want to do it in such a way that we don't lose the original source data. And as much as possible, we don't transform at all. We just use AI to organize and categorize the original data. Secondly, we want to use AI to enhance the human researcher mainly. It's to some extent, AI can be used as a cost-cutting tool, but we're a bit more interested in using AI to do things that weren't possible before. And what we're about to talk about today, which is, using AI to look at large-scale survey processing, you could say that's a kind of cost-cutting tool, but really what we're talking about is being able to do a thing that is sort of, I mean, maybe primarily due to cost, has just been unfeasible, looking at very, very large scale free text surveys, basically. So we're all about sort of enhancing the human researcher in a specific research stream using AI. But we don't want to use AI to sort of do the research for us. Finally, we want to leverage, we don't want to leverage mediocre computing. So this phrase mediocre computing is basically to refer to the fact that whilst ChatGPT or other sort of LLMs can be very clever, perhaps the best use of AI is the fact that it can sort of reliably be quite mediocre. we don't necessarily want to use it for sort of very complex tasks or tasks that require complex reasoning or judgment. Rather, it's almost we actually are more interested in exploring how we can use AI to sort of do quite sort of simple tasks, but at scale. So, slight rephrasings of sentences, summarizing. Those are the kind of things that are not sort of, I mean, on some level, they're not very complex, right? Right? But to be able to summarize millions of texts in a minute is quite an impressive thing. So that's sort of large deployment of what we call mediocre computing. So with that sort of general introduction out of the way, I want to now go on to the main topic, which is large-scale processing of survey data using Scribe. I'm just going to quickly check. Okay, there are some questions. No questions yet. Okay. I'll keep an eye out on the chat. So if there are questions midway, I'll try to see if I can address them. So what is Scribe? As I said, Scribe is not, it's not sort of a sort of an API or service that we've exposed publicly. It's rather a methodology and an in-house tool that we've developed at Autonomy for our own sort of qualitative analysis of survey data. So far we've done a number of things with it. We've organized large clusters. We organized and clustered large volumes of unstructured text. So these are surveys, interviews, and consultations. And within them, we then use Scribe to track emergent themes from the various voices inside those corpuses of text. And then we try to quantify the qualitative patterns whilst also preserving access to the original source text. So with Scribe, we don't try to replace the human researcher. We don't sort of just pop in a big Excel file of survey responses and see what comes out the other end. We rather use that as like a first draft maybe of analysis, or just a first reorganization of the survey responses, and then a human researcher, that being one of us, will look at the survey responses, maybe adjust some things that were misclassified. In a way, we use Scribe to sort of get 90% of the way in a lot of the analysis we do, and then the last 10% are the most important of sort of doing the finishing touches. And recently, we've been trying to develop Scribe into a client-facing service to support other organizazations. So this presentation and maybe the discussion following will be a good sort of feedback or ideation, maybe to that end. So here's just a couple of reports that we've used it for. Mainly, we've been using it for in combination with our shorter working week work. So we do a lot of consultancy for the shorter working week, and part of that process is to do exit surveys, and we also do a lot of survey work in general. And originally all of our survey work was, of course, completely categorical, by which I mean sort of, how did you enjoy the 4-day working week? I really liked it. I liked it. I'm neutral, etc. But using Scribe, we've been able to sort of look at more sort of higher dimensional survey data, which is basically free-form text. Okay, so I'm now going to get slightly technical. I'm just going to go through the actual process of Scribe, and it's not overly complicated, although it does use these kind of frontier technologies, the main two being embeddings and LLMs, which I will try to describe a little bit. I've been asked to sort of make it clear what tools we're using, basically, but for that I'll just give an overview of what Scribe entails. So there's essentially just 3 steps to Scribe. So we take a potentially quite long text response, and we split it up into several smaller responses. And I'll give an example of what that means. But basically, if you give the opportunity to a survey respondent to write sort of several paragraphs of text in answer to a question, you might get sort of, in effect, several responses. So you might want to sort of split these into several smaller ones. This step one is an optional, and sometimes you want to do both, where you don't split it up and you split it up and see what the difference is. In step two, we then cluster or group / categorize similar responses by semantic proximity. So that basically just means, and I will go into this in more detail, basically just means that if two responses are similar in what they're actually saying, we sort of cluster them into one group. And the key tech we use to do this is by converting the text to what's called an embedding, which is a sort of mathematical representation of the meaning of the text. Finally, once we've grouped or clustered all the responses, we then summarize each cluster using an LLM. So this is mainly to give a sort of bird's eye view of what the content of the survey is. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that an animation here. Okay, so yeah, so the first part, sorry, this title is wrong. It's meant to be splitting up responses. So the first part of the Scribe methodology is to split up a survey response. So for example, here on the left-hand side, I have an example of a survey question. So what has the shortening working week changed in your working life? And then you might get a response that sort of has a lot of different things. I'm much more focused when at work. It helps me with catching up. I love the shorter working week. I feel that I get a lot more work done in time and business now versus before the trial, etc. So basically, it's a semantically quite complex response. It has a lot of different things. So one thing we do sometimes is we then split this up into several smaller ones, and we split up in such a way that sort of each bullet point here is kind of just saying one thing. So I am much more focused at work during my working hours. I have to be more diligent with my time management. I strongly appreciate the shorter working week. I find that I'm more productive now. So this splitting will happen in such a way that the original response is still being kept, but we've sort of identified what the individual responses are, and this happens via the LLM. So you can try this if you have a ChatGPT subscription or account. You can paste this left-hand text here into ChatGPT and ask, can you identify, I mean, you have to work on the prompt a little bit, but if you write something along the lines of, can you look at this text response and try to split it up in bullet points of the individual things that this respondent is saying? And then you'll get something like this, basically. And yeah. And then once we have all of these responses, we essentially use something called embeddings to categorize and cluster these responses. So I'll explain this diagram a little bit. It's a bit abstract, but all these dots here on the right-hand side are meant to be survey responses. So here, I think this one is from a shorter working week exit survey. So each dot here is basically one split response. So for example, one of these dots could be, I'm much more focused on my work hours due to decreased working week, for example. And the abstract space here that you see is not sort of an actual distance as such. Oh, now I can see. Okay, sorry, I was looking at the wrong thing for chat. I will answer some of these questions maybe after I've gone through the methodology. So yeah, so each of these dots is a response, and the way you should look at this, and this is of course all under the hood. I'm just giving this as context for what the methodology is. It's not necessarily important so much for the actual result, but the distance between any of these 2 points is an indication of the sort of semantic similarity of the responses. So if two dots, aka responses, are close to each other, that means they sort of roughly contain the same semantic content. And as I said, the tool we use to do this is called embeddings. It's a way to sort of mathematically represent texts such that you can compare them in their semantic similarity. And What this allows us to do is to do clustering. So here, the colors of each dot is an automatic clustering algorithm that we've applied to sort of group these dots into clusters of similar types of responses. And this is not always going to be foolproof. It might have to be adjusted and changed, but it sort of gets you sort of 90% of the way into actually identifying what are people saying, right? It gets you from sort of 1,000 or 10,000 individual text responses into maybe 12 or 15 or so groups that you can then look at, groups which sort of say roughly the same things, basically. So just to explain a little bit more what I mean by semantic similarity. So two sentences that might be called semantically identical is she gave the book to her friend and her friend received the book from her. So this contains sort of almost identical semantic content. Two sentences can be semantically similar if it's slightly different, but it's sort of roughly saying the same thing. So she handed over a book as a gift to her friend is sort of roughly the same as her friend ended up with the book she gave. Although, of course, there's different there that it sort of entails different things, but you might group these things as the same thing, basically. And this is essentially the kind of procedure we've automated to some extent. So here, is a so here I've zoomed into one of the clusters in the survey responses. So these are responses to the question, thinking about your local community, what is the biggest change you'd like to see in the next year or two? And here are some of the sort of split responses that we've found. So we've had respondents asking for improved road safety measures, more spent on road improvement, improved infrastructure, better roads, etc. And as you can see, these are not exactly the same, but they're sort of broadly about infrastructure. So potholes, road safety, but also broadband, better roads, etc. So there's a sort of thematic kind of continuity in this cluster. And we've seen that in this automated process of using embeddings and clustering, we sort of identify these. But there might be sort of examples here that we might want to pick out. For example, broadband. I don't know if we want to, I mean, it is an infrastructure concern, but maybe we want to have a specific cluster just for road safety and things like that. So it's something that you might want to adjust later on, but it gets you sort of 90% of the way in terms of actually doing the groupings of the freeform text. And then after that, what you might do is then you take all of the freeform text responses and then you summarize them. So here, this is just a very few answers basically, but I think in the actual sample, this is more like the amount of dots that is here. So maybe sort of 50 or so responses. And then using the LLM, we then drive a summary. And then the human researcher, once sort of we produced basically a spreadsheet of all these responses, the human researcher can then read the summaries, look through the individual responses, and then adjust accordingly. And then, yeah, so basically at the end of this, we basically get loads of the different clusters with a summary of each cluster. As Sean will show, there's other statistics as well. There's demographic data potentially. Of course, you can make bar charts of how many people are actually in this cluster, how many people are in this cluster, etc. Yes. So finally, so I outlined some potential use cases for this kind of tech. So freeform text is, of course, goes without saying, is richer than sort of categorical surveys, and primarily they allow for unknown unknowns. So categorical surveys might sort of lead the question, so to speak. They'll give you prescribed potential possible answers, but if you open it up and allow people to sort of write in a text box, you might get things that you didn't take into account, basically. But however, if you do allow for freeform text, you might get sort of reams and reams of text, and you might not have the capacity to read through them. So Scribe makes this scalable, basically, because if you do ask for freeform text in sort of the thousands or tens of thousands, then you will get redundancies in terms of, the fact that people might say the same things but phrase it differently. And Scribe basically allows you to, basically sift through this basically and see what are the sort of unique insights and sort of, what we call, I guess in this case, the intersectional insights. Potentially Scribe may also, with some adjustments of the methodology perhaps, it might also help us to surface marginalized voices, because we sort of have the LLM that can sort of read each individual response. It allows us to kind of almost do a kind of search for the responses themselves. So there might be sort of very underrepresented or minority perspectives, but if something sticks out, then we can use LLMs to sort of sift through them basically. And this can, of course, be combined with demographic data in addition. And then finally, of course, this is a cost or productivity tool to some extent, because it can lead to sort of faster feedback loops for engagement. So we can reduce analysis times from weeks to days or hours potentially, and we can sort of have a continuing process of survey sourcing and processing. So yeah, these are some of the sketches of course we haven't applied it for EDI as such, or but I think with this general tech stack that we're presenting, I mean, I think it can be adapted, or at least it could be a fruitful discussion to that end. I think maybe now I'm at the end of my section of the presentation. I might hand it over to Sean for him to sort of go through the demo, maybe make some of what I said a bit more concrete. And then after that, we'll have quite a lot of time for discussions and questions. So thank you. Sean, do you want to, I'll stop share sliding
Super.
yeah.
Yes, thanks so much, Lucas. I'll just check before I start talking. Can everybody see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes, we can see them.
Wonderful. Super, thanks so much. Okay, so yes, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to step through a bit of a case study that we have applied Scribe to give you kind of a sense of some of the ideas, design decisions capabilities that Lucas was just talking through. So in this case study, we're going to use Scribe to investigate some data that came out of surveys from a shorter working week trial. As we mentioned at Autonomy, we do run lots of shorter working week trials for a range of companies that are curious about testing this new policy. And we work with a range of different companies on this, some quite small in size, could be, I don't know, maybe like 10 employees, up to much larger organizations that could have hundreds or potentially thousands of participants engaging in the trial, who we will be then getting feedback from at the end of the trial. I should also say, before I kind of dive into this, I do apologize. The text is quite small on my screen, so I'll do my best to narrate everything I'm taking you through. So yes, just a bit more on the context. In this sample we're going to look at here that we've put into Scribe, it's the results of a survey of 4 questions that we've put to a group of employees. We've had around 200 and 250, between 200 and 250 responses to each question. So as you can see, that is around about 1,000 responses. And the question is, it prompts an unstructured response. So it's not a multiple choice. It is encouraging the respondents to provide free-form text. So obviously for the people who are reviewing these unstructured text answers, that's potentially quite a lot of work if it is 1,000. When we come to the end of a trial and we put a survey to a group of employees to try and assess how that trial has gone, we package up the data from that survey into a report. And obviously, as you can see, with 1,000 responses, that's going to take quite a long time to read, and that gets more and more challenging as the number of responses increases. So it's also the case, of course, that once our researchers have read through all the responses, that's of course not going to be the only time that they look at those responses. They can't just go and write the report straight away. It's likely that they will be doing multiple passes over the data as they attempt to taxonomize it, to find the key findings, the key things that have been discussed. So again, that process becomes more lengthy, more challenging, the more responses you have. So that's where Scribe comes in. Scribe is essentially where we take all of these responses and we cluster them. So it makes it much more easy to find common themes, common points of discussion that can help our researchers when they are investigating all of this data and writing it up. So in the interface here, what we've got is, if I click up here in the config bar, we can see these are the 4 questions that made up the survey. So the first question that we asked the respondents was, what has the shorter working week changed in your work life? The second question is, how has the shorter working week impacted your personal life? And what we can see is that when I select these questions, in the semantic space, we've got all these dots appearing, which every single dot essentially represents a unique statement that was made by a respondent who was taking part in the survey. So we can see up here for this question, we had 262 employees providing unique responses to the question. So that's 262 responses. But as Lukas was mentioning, before we kind of visualize this data in Scribe, what we're actually doing with each of the responses someone provides is we're splitting them up into unique statements, because this makes it much easier to parse and cluster and find common points of discussion, particularly for cases where someone has provided a very long answer with lots of detail in it. Of course, they may give multiple they may have multiple points they wish to raise around how the shorter working week has impacted their personal life. And so if we want to actually read these responses, we can navigate around this window. And if we highlight over the responses, we can see in the bottom window, it actually shows the content of that response. So every dot representing the response from one person. We can see for this one that I'm highlighting over, it says in the bottom corner for the response, so this is the actual original data. I'll just read the first couple of lines. The respondent has said, the shorter working week has massively impacted their lives. So they've been able to take hospital and doctor appointments on their rest day. So there's no impact on work, allows them to spend quality time with their children, doing the school drop and pick up, which they've never been able to do before. So we can see in there already, that's just the first couple of lines of this response, that there's multiple points in there. So what we've used Scribe to do is to parse out these individual statements that have been made. And so the statement that Scribe has parsed out from this, or one of them, reads, the shorter working week has had a great impact on my life as it allows me to make doctors and hospital appointments on my rest day without interfering with work. So we can see there that this individual statement allows that point to be understood and to be arranged around other similar points that highlight the fact that the shorter working week enhances appointment scheduling. We can also see here below the statement that there is metadata as well. So we get a sense of the role of the person who made this statement, gender, ethnicity, disability. And again, this can be really useful for understanding across different groups, what is more of a priority, and helping our researchers to be more targeted in understanding how the trial has gone for different groups within the workforce. So if we just kind of explore a little bit around this window, we can see, explore some of the other clusters. So this cluster over here, which is highlighted in green, if I read the statement, it says, I'm now able to dedicate more time at the gym. And if we look over in the topics bar, we can see that every point here is part of a cluster that is labeled as the survey reveals increased exercise opportunities. So this is for everyone that has written something about the fact that taking part in the shorter working week has allowed them to exercise more. What we can do as well is actually get some stats on the number of respondents that are in this cluster. So we can see that there's 25 respondents who provided an answer mentioning the shorter working week helped increase exercise opportunities. This is about 9.5% of respondents. And if we go down, we can actually see the individual statements here as well. And if I actually zoom in on this cluster, you'll see that as I'm well, actually, this you probably can't see because it is really, really small. Maybe I'll zoom in a bit more. Yeah, so as I'm kind of hovering over these points, you can see some of the different dots, potentially see some of the different dots lighting up. And again, what we kind of think is quite important with Scribe, and particularly when we're using AI models, is to give the users a sense of how data is being rearranged by the models. So you might, by being able to see which dots correspond to each response or statement, you can get a sense of what semantic space means and build a bit of intuition, because it is, as Lukas mentioned earlier, quite an abstract thing we're doing, taking all of these responses and arranging them in 2D into clusters. It sounds quite abstract at first, so it is quite useful being able to actually have multiple ways of understanding how similar concepts or similar ways of saying things are arranged. At the bottom here as well, one other thing that we can do with Scribe is actually to link it up with a local database. And this is very useful when our researchers are potentially considering, for some of the findings they're seeing in the data, how this relates to reports that have been written before. So in the further reading section, what we've done here is taken the whole of our organization's publication catalog, and we have searched it for passages from reports that are relevant or correlate with the individual topics that are being found in the data. So in this case here, because this particular cluster is talking about participants who've experienced increased opportunities to exercise as a result of the shorter working week, it's found this report we previously did on the shorter working week in Iceland, where if I look here from an excerpt from that report, we can see someone is discussing having more time to go out and do exercise. So yeah, this can be kind of useful for some of the different topics or niche topics if we are looking to quickly see and find relevant publications or research we've done before that is relevant or agrees with that finding. Okay, so I'm just going to see if there's any, maybe there is a few questions, but I'm wondering maybe we will,
I think,
maybe just,
yeah,
sorry.
if you want to touch on some, because some might be relevant. So for example, there's one that says, can you provide any examples from your work of how this approach has helped to amplify responses from marginalized groups? And I've had the advantage of being able to look at this demo. So my other question was whether we could share a link to the demo, whether people could look at it or if it's sort of behind paywall or, security and things like that. So if we could put a link in the chat, then people can explore it further. But when I was playing around with it, there was the filtering for a disability voice, for example.
Yeah, Sean, go ahead. Just paste it in the chat. We have, I guess there's two main ways. One of which is just an idea, but it's just something we've been toying with, so we haven't done it in practice. But the main thing is, of course, is that when we do survey responses like this, we have demographic or sort of metadata in our responses, so we can look at gender, ethnicity, disabilities, and stuff like that. So when we've done, for example, I forgot which survey this was from, whether we used this. I think this might have been from our follow-up survey so maybe I can even link this report. So yeah, so we did a follow-up survey on the 4-day week a year on. So, and we were a report based on this. And also, Sean, feel free to paste the link to the demo on the chat.
Yes.
And yeah, there basically we used the Scribe methodology to look at all the server responses, and then we also zoomed into sort of different sort of minority demographics based on this, basically. So all the clusterings and things like that sort of can be used in context with demographic data to sort of look at what minority voices are sort of saying and things like that. So we looked at things like disability and gender composition, etc.
Should I demo? Sorry, Lukas, to jump in. Should I demo that quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just realized this is very, very relevant. So yeah, of course, relating to that, much more relevant to EDI, one thing we can do with this is filter all of the responses based on metadata that's provided about participants. So for instance, I could select gender, I could select ethnicity, and we could investigate. These are all the responses for women of color within the group. So we can look at certain points here. For instance, this is a small cluster of blue points. If I go in and click, we can see that 45% of the group of employees provided responses within this topic. So yeah, it does allow us to, at like a very large scale, to zoom in to filter and to zoom in and understand more how different groups within the workforce are actually responding differently. So again, for our researchers, that can be very helpful because obviously there is hundreds of responses, and at first it can be very difficult to filter through and potentially kind of have more of a fine-grained analysis. So, sorry, Lucas, for jumping in there. I wonder if there's anything else.
That sounds like it answers another question, which is, can the client choose what demographics they want to measure and expand beyond gender, ethnicity, and disability? So is that depending on what metadata questions were in the survey initially?
It is,
yeah,
yes.
I mean, basically, so you just think of this as like a thing that Scribe processes general surveys. A general survey will have, they'll have a gender, selection box, other sort of metadata and things like that. But then these can be combined. So you might have a survey that has free-form text parts and then categorical parts, and the categorical parts then become metadata that then we can use to do sort of other kinds of statistics.
So do you have the option, sort of the follow-up question is like expand on the category. So instead of saying person of color, it's, the whole range of ethnicities that the census might use, for example. So this is just depending on the design of the initial survey.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's two things. Of course, we're not limited to specific categories. I mean, that's just completely up to how you design the survey. So if you have more sort of options for ethnicity, then that's obviously fine. But you can also think of Scribe as a way to sort of have fluid categories in itself. So you might, for example, in the ethnicity box, you might not have categorical choices. You might have like a little one-line text box where you write anything, right? And then Scribe can be used even for that, where you use Scribe to sort of identify the unique kinds of responses in that specific category. And then you get something that looks like metadata, right? So that's another application. Yeah, hopefully that was clear. Should I go on to answer some of the other questions, or?
Yeah, I was going to go to the next one that had like a thumbs up, just to remind people you can upvote the questions that you're keen on seeing answered. What LLM are you using and what has it been trained upon? And given the known biases of, for example, ChatGPT and friends, are you not concerned about those biases creeping in?
The answer is yes. The LMs we're a bit agnostic with respect to them. I mean, it's of course in principle that is. The methodology itself does not rely on a specific LLM, but of course the results will vary depending on it. But we've been using a variety of ones. We're obviously using the OpenAI ones, so that's GPT-4o, GPT-4o Mini. There's also Claude 3.5. We've also used a bit of Gemini, but in a way, because of I mean, what are the main ways we try to avoid? I mean, there's no way to avoid bias on some level. Either it's because of the fact that there's a human researcher dealing with these, so that's biased, and then of course there's ChatGPT, which obviously is biased. But one way we try to do this is by basically we don't ask GPT as such to make sort of subjective judgments. This is part of the principle that I discussed briefly in the beginning, which is that of mediocre intelligence. We treat ChatGPT as something that has mediocre intelligence or only rely on its ability to sort of do very mediocre tasks. So sort of kind of summaries and things like that. And that does not avoid bias. or I mean, at least it doesn't avoid the risk of bias. But that's also why in the way we set up the methodology, the way we use it, it's not so much that we're throwing a big survey at the AI and asking it to do all the work. It's rather we kind of mostly use the AI. You should kind of see Scribe as like, if you get 1,000 responses and you get them in a big Excel file, it's going to take a very long time to read through them all, but you should still read through them all. However, when you get them in the Excel format, it's going to be in a sort of random order, basically, probably in a chronological order. Scribe lets you basically sort and organize these into more sort of broadly thematic categories, basically. But then it is still, in proper usage of this tool, you should still look through the responses and then see if the categories match to what you actually want to achieve and things like that. So so then in some sense we're just offloading the bias onto to the human researcher, but that's kind of unavoidable. Yeah.
Let me move on to another question while we still have some time. Will it be a lot to ask the accuracy of the model?
I mean, in some sense, no. I mean, you'll never get full accuracy. For example, there will be sort of misclassifications in the clustering, so to speak, but um, the reason why it works is because it's largely accurate and we're not asking too much of the AI, really. But then, of course, as I said, we're presenting the data to the researchers in such a way that it's encouraged that you make the adjustments necessary for any sort of errors and stuff like that. So yeah.
I like the use of linking publications, this person says, to the identified topics. How do you choose the publications? Are they only the resources you have selected or written? And is there scope for expanding the publications it links to?
Yeah, in this case, it's just our reports. That was mostly because we were interested in seeing what are sort of the links to our corpus of our body of work, basically. But it's completely you can throw anything in there, basically. So yeah, so any sort of body of work that you do, you can do that kind of automatic linking.
The last one that we haven't got to is why your tool and why not ChatGPT, and how is your tool different? Is it just that we can have the original data?
Yeah, so there's a good question. The main reason is basically that we want to, well, there's a variety of reasons. The first maybe is we want to use AI in a controlled setting. So having it in a sort of pipeline where you can basically ask, if you use ChatGPT, basically, you're going to have to use it once for every question, or you just throw all the survey at the same time. We prefer having a pipeline where we send individual questions to the AI with the right context. So it just gives us more control to sort of calibrate the procedure. But then, of course, the main thing is basically that there's a context limit to ChatGPT, which basically means that there's a limit to how much text you can actually give it. So the approach of summarizing things like that won't scale sort of infinitely. And then the third thing is that ChatGPT does not do part of what we're doing is the automatic clustering using based on semantic similarity, and that is not something that ChatGPT does. Of course, if you give in ChatGPT like 100 responses and ask, can you group these based on semantic similarity, it will do it. But that's only because ChatGPT will do anything you ask of it. And we've built a pipeline to basically have a bit more sort of control and also quality assurance of the actual thing we're doing. And then maybe as the question says, is it also the sort of original data? Yes, it also gives us control of how we present the data and making sure the original stuff is there as well.
Great, thank you. A key to the model is its input, which is the result of the LLM splitting into main points. Have you evaluated the splitting model, and do you use any tuning of the splitting model based on the survey?
If the question asks sort of, we do fine tuning as such, we don't really do fine tuning. That's mostly because of our experiences with fine tuning as usually not the thing you want to calibrate. Rather, you want to calibrate sort of the context that goes into the model. So that's something we calibrate. Yes, so there, like the main considerations is that you want the splitting to, you want each split response to maintain enough of context of the original response so that you don't have to read them together, basically. So we have made a couple of evaluations. Depending on the survey, you might not want to split up as well. You kind of want to group them together. So it's kind of a kind of a thing that we sort of, you want to use some judgment on whether you want to use or not. But yeah, I think that answers the question.
Okay. And the last one that we've got so far is, have any automated methods been used to anonymize participants' responses? I'm particularly curious about how Scribe handles personal or identifiable information within the comments.
Yeah, it's a great question and suggestion. I mean, we have anonymized them. Part of it is quite simple, of course. If there's any parts in the metadata in the server responses that are that directly reveal information, we can filter that out.
Is that still having to be done by a researcher as opposed to the AI model? For example, if you've only got 3 Black women in your organization and you can see that, is that still a researcher having to make that intervention?
I mean, in this case, yes. We haven't implemented any sort of automatic suggestions of that kind, but that's why it's an interesting suggestion, to be honest. I mean, some of that could probably be done. In our case, it hasn't been a necessity to, because it's an in-house tool and there's always an expectation that we're all going to look through it all. But a lot of these things are possible. And then, of course, there is a kind of, because the responses are sort of split up in that way, there is a sort of further anonymization because even the original text is sort of kept hidden if we choose it to be. But one potential interesting thing that can be done is actually doing a kind of filtering procedure of going through the freeform text and then actually identifying whether there is personal or identifiable information. And that's certainly possible. That's not something we've done, but it would be very easy to implement.
Okay, just because we've got a final 2 minutes, I was going to ask a final question, which is, if somebody wants to make use of this tool, how do they go about being able to use it? Is it basically if you're a partner or if you're a client of Autonomy, or is this something that you guys are looking to commercialize and sell in some form?
Yeah, so far what we're maybe, I mean, we are actually considering make it into sort of a public facing tool, but so far what we've done is we sort of talk to sort of, we work a lot with unions, for example, and they have a lot of server responses. So
Unions, as employment unions.
yes, yeah, trade unions. So there we sort of offer this as a service, where basically we get given a server response, or we come in earlier where we actually help. We look at the survey structure and sort of try to shape it to fit the Scribe methodology better. And then we basically do some part of the analysis, like the automated stuff, and then we work together and process that data, basically. So for now, how people use it is to contact us. I can send my email in the chat, and then we can sort of start up a conversation about how we can use it together with people. Down the line, we might actually try to create some kind of public-facing tool, user interfacing tool. So you go on a website and upload a thing, but we're not quite there yet. The demo that we've posted is it's a demo that sort of roughly shows what that could look like, but it's also very rough in its shape. But, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I've put a link in the chat to our upcoming seminars, and I think the next one is at Social Network Analysis on the 11th of June. That's 2 o'clock. And thank you very much to Sean and Lukas from Autonomy, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.